My name is Tyler Horning, and this will be a slideshow on genetic susceptibility to alcoholism with research based on data collected from twins. The article this presentation is based on was a very long study running from 1979 to 1981. In this time, a total of 206 young adult twins took part. The beginning of this article talks about how vulnerability to alcohol can be linked to a lack of dependence on alcohol, or a lack of addiction to alcohol. What this means is that if the genetics of an individual are non-dependent on alcohol, meaning that they are not addicted to alcohol, they are more likely to become intoxicated when they're exposed to alcohol. Similar to my last statement, if the genes in the body are more dependent on alcohol, it's more likely that those genes will be less probable to become intoxicated. This is not exactly good, however, because they are in fact alcohol dependent, which means that they're more acceptable to alcoholism or addiction. A study that inspired this one was the Australian Alcohol Challenge Twin Study. This study was similar to the one in question because it tested twins for the response of alcohol. However, the Australian study tested primarily males, whereas the study in question tested a relatively equal amount of both males and females. Hypothesis 1 of this study states that the contribution to alcohol dependence in men and women is determined by genetic fluctuations in alcohol sensitivity. Hypothesis 2 states that natural fluctuations in alcohol sensitivity are likely linked to hormonal levels and the inability to maintain a fixed or steady position. This is known as static ataxia. Hypothesis 3 states that genetically determined differences in alcohol sensitivity contributed significantly to differences in alcohol dependence risk, or in other words, genetic fluctuations in alcohol sensitivity, or the inability to hold your alcohol, are large factors of alcohol dependence risk, or the addiction to alcohol. Participants of this study were pulled from a lot of different backgrounds, such as a group whose parents only had a small problem with alcohol, another group whose parents had a life of alcohol abuse, and a final group who they themselves were alcohol dependent, or they were addicted to alcohol. The control for each test was a sober individual, so one of the twins would drink the alcohol and the other twin would remain sober. The article states that this study contained 45 monozygotic MZ, or identical female twins, so 45 identical female twins, 43 identical male twins, 42 dizygotic DZ, or non-identical female twins, so 42 non-identical female twins, 37 non-identical male twins, and lastly 39 non-identical mixed-sex twins. What this means is that one was male and the other twin was female. Number of women in this study was 213, and the number of men was 199. Every participant of this study was given a questionnaire containing questions like drinking history, social variations, and personality. Also included in the questionnaire was a question about their average number of drinks per week. Results of this are in the next slide. Each non-control subject of this test was given a measured amount of alcohol and then ran through a number of tests. These tests were administered 20 minutes after the dosage of alcohol. The first test was body sway. This was measured using algorithms and equations. The data collected from this test was pre-alcohol sway and post-alcohol sway. This test was performed with both eyes open and eyes closed. For the next test, participants were given a simple question of how drunk do you feel? For this evaluation, they were told to use a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being completely sober and 10 being the most drunk they'd ever felt. Low scores indicated a low sensitivity or a high resistance to alcohol. The general results found from each group are as follows. In the group whose parents had a slight problem with alcohol, it was found that both males and females had a slight increase in alcohol sensitivity. However, female sensitivity was slightly higher. In the group whose parents had a lifetime of alcohol abuse, they showed that men were slightly more resistant to alcohol, but women were still impacted at roughly the same level. However, an interesting note is that neither the men nor the women were at a higher likelihood to become alcoholic if their parents had already been. In the group of participants who they themselves were dependent on alcohol or addicted to alcohol, the results showed that men were significantly less sensitive to alcohol than the women of this group. What this indicates is that the more dependent on alcohol an individual is, the lower their sensitivity. Now this makes sense because the more addicted to alcohol somebody is, the more they're going to be drinking it, meaning that the higher tolerance they're going to build for it. From what I read in this study, the main purpose of selecting all twins as participants was mostly to see if alcoholism was purely genetic or not. Results showed a very slight indication that this could be the case, but they were not conclusive enough to produce a definite answer. As shown at the bottom of the slide, women are represented in white and men are represented in black. So starting at 0 drinks a week, this is our control group, there's roughly 13% of women who are drinking nothing, and there's roughly 9% of men who are doing the same. When we go up to 1 to 3 drinks a week, however, roughly 25% of women are drinking 1 to 3 drinks a week, and roughly 16% of men are doing the same. Moving on to 4 to 6 drinks a week, women's percentages have gone up just a hair, maybe to 26 or 27%, and men's have gone up as well just a little bit to probably 16 or 17%. So roughly 26% of women are drinking 4 to 6 drinks a week, and roughly 17% of men are drinking 4 to 6 as well. Moving over to 7 to 12 drinks a week, women's percentages have gone down slightly to about 24, maybe 25, and men's percentages have continued to go up just a hair. Theirs are probably sitting at around 17 or 18. So around 24% of women are drinking 7 to 12 drinks a week, and around 17 to 18% of men are drinking 7 to 12. Moving on into the heavy drinker section, 13 to 24 and upwards of 25, this is where women's percentages has gone way down, but men's are still climbing. Women's percentages are around probably 9% for 13 to 24 drinks a week, and there are roughly 17 to 18% of men drinking 13 to 24. Once we move over into the very heavy drinker section, possibly even addiction section, this is where men's are at their most high point at around 19 to 20%, so around 20% of men are drinking upwards of 25 drinks a week, and women's percentages have continued to go down to about 4%. Now this graph is a little bit confusing, but let's break it down. So up top we have history of alcohol dependence, or in other words, have you had a history of alcohol addiction? So the women, 155 answered no to this question, and 28 answered yes to this question. As for men, 120 answered no to this question, and 38 answered yes. Now I think it's important to note that there are more men that answered yes, or there are more men that have been addicted to alcohol than women. As for the main body, using comparison, we can see that the women who were addicted to alcohol have much lower scores than those not addicted to alcohol in the subjective intoxication unit. This indicates that those addicted to alcohol, or those who drink alcohol more frequently, have built up a higher tolerance and are more used to the effects of intoxication. The men's results are very similar, however, theirs are overall lower. Interesting to note is that the scores of addicted males are much lower than that of the scores of addicted females. Something interesting to note about this study is that women's alcohol sensitivity was not increased by a history of depression. However, their dependence on alcohol was increased. So basically, when a woman was depressed, she was more likely to become addicted to alcohol, but her sensitivity never went up. Results of this study showed hypothesis 1 to be correct in assuming that the more sensitive an individual is to alcohol, the less dependent they tend to be on alcohol. Hypothesis 2 was also correct in assuming that alcohol sensitivity is linked to an inability to hold still. The participants who were more sensitive did in fact show much more difficulty holding still than those who were less sensitive to alcohol. And hypothesis 3, the final hypothesis, was also shown to be true throughout the study because the sensitivity of an individual does in fact increase the risk of addiction if exposed to alcohol. In conclusion, men, but not women, with higher genetic risk of alcoholism have a lot lower alcohol sensitivity, or in other words, they're a lot more tolerant towards alcohol. Results of this test also concluded that the offspring of alcoholics show much lower ratings for intoxication after alcohol than those with non-alcoholic parents. And lastly, participants who had alcoholic parents were at an increased rate to become alcoholic themselves or alcohol dependent. For further studies on this subject, I would like to see a greater range of genetic studies, such as is the effect of alcohol identical between a set of twins? I'd also like to gain a deeper understanding of the parents, such as can an individual's family genetics predispose them to be more likely to become addicted to alcohol? And lastly, I'd like the aspect of men being more tolerant to alcohol than women to be studied further.